and going into the lecture series, okay? So this covers units 2, 3, and 4 from your module. And we'll deal with legal and ethical. We'll talk about the different roles for nursing, what is involved in those roles, and then we'll finally go on into the safety advocacy issues at the end. So legal, what's legal? Something's legal, it means it has a law attached to it. There's a law that specifies do or do not. So how's that different from ethical? Ethicals, those should or shouldn'ts, ought not do, and those are not always so black and white. So legals, there's a, it's what you would go to court of law and they would say did you follow the law or did you break the law? Ethical, those situations are a little bit muddier, and we'll talk about those as well today. So what is a crime? A crime is an act that violates public law. So if I'm not paying attention and I go faster in a speed zone than the sign is posted, even if I didn't intend to speed, I have broken the law. I have committed a quote unquote a crime. And so that's a legal definition. We don't tend to think of them in those terms, but it's if there's a public law and I fail to follow it, I have basically broken that law, and that's also known as a crime in legal terms. So what's negligence? Negligence means that there's a standard of conduct expected for some role, and that the person should reasonably know, a reasonable person should know what that standard is, and by failing to meet that standard or misconduct outside of that standard put someone else at risk for harm. So if we have child abuse, or negligence, that's a standard expected of what a reasonable parent would do. A reasonable parent would not leave a child in a locked car on a summer day. And if you fall below that standard, a reasonable person would know that would put that child at risk. That's an example of negligence. When we go into professional negligence, we call that malpractice. So that there's a standard of a profession, and I fall below the standard for my profession, I can be held liable for malpractice, which is professional negligence. There's a lot of definitions on this page. Let me kind of go decipher out the really important things to know. I've mentioned a Nurse Practice Act that it defines the scope of practice for the state of Texas for nurses. That's registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, advanced practice nurses, including your nurse anesthetists, your nurse midwives, your nurse practitioners, and your clinical nurse specialists. The Texas Board of Nursing has been given the task of enforcing the Nurse Practice Act for the state of Texas. So what's the job of the Board of Nursing? Basically the same as ours, is to promote and protect the welfare of the people that we take care of, and in our case, the people of the state of Texas. And so the Texas Board of Nursing has the authority to define and basically to implement, to interpret the Nurse Practice Act. If an agency says, we've got to question what it means for somebody to commit abandonment, then the Board of Nursing would put up a position statement, or they would get this legislature to give clarity, because the state legislature is the one who passes the laws that are in the Nurse Practice Act that governs what the nurses do in the state and what the Texas Board would implement or enforce. So they make sure that everybody who's licensed is competent to do so, meets a minimum competence, okay? That you've met the requirements to be educated, you've met the requirements to be licensed, and you've met the requirements to be relicensed or renew your license. It regulates how we practice nursing in the state. It doesn't regulate employment issues. It doesn't regulate how my particular facility schedules time off or gives you your holidays, but it regulates the practice of nursing. And this is a kind of a little important difference here to understand on approving a nursing education program. They approve us based on whether or not we meet the requirements that are posted for nursing schools to operate in the state of Texas. They approve us based on, are we meeting the minimum requirements for people passing their NCLEX, passing their boards, so that they approve us to function or not to function. But they are different than those who accredit us. There are national organizations that accredit a nursing program, gives it their accreditation. We use the American College for Educating Nurses, and that's ASIN is its nickname. And ASIN comes, I think it's about every 7 years, and reevaluates a program. We're in our cycle. They're coming up this fall, and we will be, we're preparing documents now, and we have binders that we're preparing. Then we have certain requirements from ASIN that we have to meet for them to accredit us. So a School of Nursing would have to be accredited by a national accrediting certifying body. We also, as a school, have to be approved by the State of Texas Board of Nursing. Compact licensure. This is a relatively recent addition. Is that several states have gotten together and have signed an agreement where if I am duly licensed to practice, took my boards in Arkansas, and then I moved here, and then I had to go through a process of reapplying and submitting paperwork and showing my educational training and all that. Now what they're trying to do is that if you are in this compact, you're in this group of states that have agreed that if Texas, they have looked at our requirements, they say, yes, that anybody coming from Texas who's been licensed in Texas meets the requirements to also function in New Mexico. So then, or they do that for Arkansas. Then if I'm licensed in one state and I move to another state because that's in the compact and my state's in the compact, it facilitates or it speeds up my ability to be approved to practice nursing in the new state. For instance, Texas has a compact. You can choose to be a part of that or not. I am, so that I could function in New Mexico as well as in Texas without having to make special applications, special paperwork. It's part of the agreement we have between these states. And there's currently, well, I didn't check the recent count. As of this first of the year, there were, I think it was up to 30 or 31. It's more and more states are beginning to recognize that that's an important thing to do. So we have a compact licensure, and it says on my license, it's a compact, it's an RN compact license, okay? And it's just a way to facilitate and acknowledge the fact that we're just a much more mobile society than we previously were. Has really helped out, especially like businesses where they travel frequently or move you frequently, military, some of the major national corporations, and it's just a real benefit to have that. We had Good Samaritan laws that were posted up on our Blackboard, and the Good Samaritan laws you're probably familiar with in that it doesn't require me to stop and render aid, but if as a nurse I do stop and render aid, so long as I follow the state's requirements, then I am protected. I have limited liability, basically. I'm protected from my actions in that situation that tried to help someone, okay? Some of the things you need to remember, you're not protected if you caused the problem. Like if I or you were involved in a driving while under the influence, and you hit somebody and it injured them, and I got out and helped them, and and kept the airway open and got them help and all that, it doesn't release me from the liability that I was driving under the influence and I hit them. But if I'm driving along, I see an accident, I stop and I render aid, then the aid that I'm giving, so long as I stay within my scope of practice, and that's a big key, staying within your scope of practice, then I have protection. In the state of Texas, they have also extended that to cover emergency situations, even at a hospital, because the issues of you receiving someone who's not able to give you their information, not able to tell you if they're diabetic, not able to tell you their past medical history. And it gives the emergency providers, even in an emergency setting, a little bit of limited liability as well, that protects them from information that was not available to them. Once you're stabilized, that protection goes away, but it also does apply for an emergency room situation. The other interesting thing that is happening is about the ability for different states, and I think there's about half of the states in the nation now have done this, but have passed some sort of, basically it's an overdose Good Samaritan law, so that if you're with somebody who has overdosed on opioids, especially like heroin, recreation, opioids, then you call, say you're at a party, they overdo it, they pass out, you call 911, then the states that have these laws write into it how much protection you have. Like, I'm safe to call 911. The fact that I'm at this party where maybe they're doing, illicit drugs, they give them a liability for give us some protection to the person who called in, so that they will call in the overdose and get help for people. We're also seeing in some states, and now Texas has not moved yet on that aspect about, like, if you're you're involved in it and somebody overdoses, then you calling in, getting them help. They're still debating that one in our legislature. But the one they have approved is for the use of naloxone, it is Narcan. They have given permission for pharmacists to be able to prescribe it, or for doctors to be able to order it for a third party. In other words, if you have a family member who's a high risk of opioid overdose, maybe you know that they have a heroin addiction, then a doctor can write a third party, like the parent or a guardian or a significant other, to have that medication, and to be able to dispense it to somebody who's having an overdose without them being charged with any sort of crime for that. And so that is an interesting new phenomenon we're seeing with the Good Samaritan laws. So be interesting to check out. If you move to another state, check out and see what they've got. Like I said, different states have gotten to different points on that. The initial research is looking pretty good that it has not. Some of the concerns was that it would basically kind of, people would take it as open season, well, it's okay for me to get high and nothing will happen to me. Well, that's not been happening. Pretty much is what they've seen is that there's been a decrease in the number of the overdose deaths in that state. So it looks like a good thing. Be interesting to see how that develops in the state of Texas. Our legislature only meets every other year, so that's why they have not moved as fast on this as some other states may have. You know about the child abuse, you know about elder abuse and living wills. These are all things you would want to review. You're familiar with HIPAA. We are presented with it every single semester. We want to make sure that we understand that we have to protect the patient's confidentiality, their identity, and anything that would connect them when we are transmitting or receiving information about that patient. While you may not be familiar with the HCA HPS, and that's kind of a long name, it's a consumer survey that came about as a consequence of the ACA, the American Accountability Act. It was what's known as Obamacare. It was the part of the health legislation that came about in trying to make hospitals accountable for how well they take care of the public. What that law requires is that within 6 weeks of discharge, the hospital has to survey patients. They have to ask them basically their satisfaction. Some of the questions on, and it's actually quite lengthy. It's about 20, 30 questions on it. But did they answer your call like promptly? That's on there. when you were discharged, were you explained to your satisfaction, and that's key, your satisfaction about the medications you were discharged home on? Did your provider visit you as often as you would like? So there's these different, in even talking about the cleanliness of the facility, I mean, it's quite comprehensive. So what do you think they do with those results? The federal government requires this, the hospitals turn it in to the federal government. And so then you're basically given a score based on your percentage, you know, that 80% of the people you surveyed say, yeah, they did a good job. If you fall below 80%, what happens? Well, what I've seen happen is that when they do their huddle or the morning rounds or whatever it's called, when the nursing administration comes onto the unit and presents the information, well, this one particular time we're standing there at the starter's shift and this happened. And the finding was that they had fallen below 80% on they were promptly relieving patients' pain, because that's one of the categories. And so then a discussion took place where, well, what's going on? And so the answer that came out was, well, the new graduates are so slow that they're not responding and getting those patients medicated promptly. And so that's why our numbers are low. So, you know, when they make laws, many times, though, people making laws have good intentions. They may not always realize the consequences of that. But the consequence that day was that the new grads were made to feel like, oh, we're in trouble. So that's why you'll see the administrators coming around. You know how when you're at a restaurant and the manager comes around and asks you, did you like your food? Well, the administrators come around and they ask some of these questions that are on that survey. Have they been answering your pain promptly? Have they answering your call outs to your satisfaction? And so they're trying to gauge how their nurses are doing. And so you'll see that happen sometimes when the nursing administration is coming around and talking with the patients in the rooms. We understand sexual harassment has no place either in society or in nursing. And certainly we have to be cognizant of how our actions are perceived as nurses when we're assessing people, since we're standing in what they call the intimate zone of a person's body space. That's why we ask permission to make sure that they understand. Also, if we're doing procedures that are involving the genitalia, it's a recommendation is that you have another staff member in the room with you so that you would have basically an objective set of eyes as well. And the American with Disabilities Act, as it comes into play in nursing, both for schools of nursing and for the institutions that we work for, are looking more and more how to accommodate people that may have some recognized disabilities and allow them to function in a role and make accommodations. And the law is reasonable accommodations. So that sometimes may play a role as well in some of the things you may see about either school or about nursing itself. This is the breakdown of all the different types of laws. Due process, we all have equal protection under the law. This is what our Constitution provides every citizen, regardless of your position, that you're allowed to, it prevents you from having your rights denied, basically. Due process, equal protection under the law. The kind of laws we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about both the criminal laws where you've done something, and I'm looking at this in the actions of a nurse. You have done an action or failed to do an action that led to death or danger to a patient, then we may be charged with a criminal act. And a criminal act seeks to find guilt, that you're guilty or not guilty. And if you're guilty, that there would be a punishment attached to it. Loss of license, imprisonment, required community service, those sort of things, that there would be attached punishment to it. Things like homicide or manslaughter, Euthanasia, we've seen that as an issue with some nurses that erroneously believe that they're doing terminal people a favor by giving them a heavier dose of a narcotic that allows them to stop breathing. So that would be like a criminal act. Civil act, a civil offense, it's where we've violated a contract. And so in this case, they're wanting liability. They're wanting to make you responsible for the damage done to somebody else or for the lack of what you did. And typically that's looking for monetary damages. And that's what you see in malpractice. Malpractice is typically you're liable for this civil act that led to the harm of this patient. And because the harm happened to this person has either made them unable to work, has left them permanently disabled, that there should be some sort of monetary damages awarded to them because of the damage you have caused. And so we'll look at that when we're looking at the malpractice suits. All right. And so they can be private or public. And so the ones we're talking about, and you know these, you've had these before, negligence, libel, slander, invasion of privacy, assault and battery, imprisonment, and abandonment, okay? And I'm giving you some examples here. But these are this is by no means exhaustive. I mean, there's many other ways of doing this. One of the things that we're now having to be concerned about libel and slander is because of the use of social media, where nurses feel like they need to vent about a particular situation that they incurred, but in doing so, they may violate a patient's situation, and so they can be guilty of libel, of misrepresenting or misspeaking about a person, or actually slandering them, saying that they had done something that they have not done. And when this is discovered, especially if you're doing it on social media, they have a right to take you to court if they can prove that you have met the legal requirements in the state for misrepresenting or giving false information about them. Then you could be held liable for guilty of libel and slander. Assault and battery, that's why we ask patients, is it okay if I examine you? Assault is that they feel threatened with bodily harm. Battery is if I actually do the physical act that they take as harm to them. With restraints, you know that we worry about imprisonment, and abandonment is when you have not given over the care of your patient to somebody else and you are not available. Then the patient has an adverse outcome, then you can be charged with abandonment. And the State Board of Nursing does take that very seriously. So if you're going to leave the unit, you should report off to, in your case, the nurse that was working with that patient. If that nurse is not available, you go to the charge nurse and report off to the charge nurse. So even to take a break without saying, hey, I'm going to step in and take 15 minutes. Mr. Johnson, I left him in bed and he was resting okay, but if he hollers or puts his call light on, would you go check on him for me? He can get out of bed with some help, but I just want you to have an ear out listening for him. You know, that at least doing something like that, so that patient is never left without a nurse who's kind of got their eye on the floor, paying attention, knowing that they need to answer that person's call for help. All right. Any questions before we continue on? We're going to go over malpractice and what it takes for that to be determined, but I just thought I'd give you an opportunity at this point if I needed to clarify to this point. All right, I'm going to go over the elements of malpractice. And again, malpractice is professional negligence. So a professional, that's like a lawyer, a doctor, a nurse, an engineer, an architect, anybody who's at the status of a professional, and that typically means you requires a college degree to to be and to be either certified or licensed to do your job, then you're considered a professional. And then malpractice is professional negligence, okay? But we're going to talk about it in terms of nursing. So we have to prove these elements to be found guilty of malpractice. First, the plaintiff, the patient who's making the allegation that they did me wrong, they failed to do something for me, or they did something that harmed me, they have to meet these criteria to prove malpractice. So first of all, they have to prove that there was a duty. I walked on, I said, hello, my name is, I'm going to be taking care of you the next 12 hours. I have established a verbal agreement with this patient. That duty is not relieved until another nurse is available to take on that patient's care. And so it's real important that they can establish, did I have a duty to this person? Then if I had the duty, what they're wanting to show is that I breached my duty. I failed to do what I was supposed to do, or I did something outside my scope of practice that I should have known not to do. So I have breached my duty. My duty is to provide care within my scope of practice. It's to implement my doctor's orders. It's to assess my patient. It's to timely notify the provider of any abnormal results or findings or change in status. So this is my duty to this patient. So it goes beyond just that I said, hello, my name is. My duty is that I am assessing, that I am monitoring my patient, that I am documenting on my patient, that I am updating the people involved in this patient's care about changes in status. And then if I breach that duty, then I fail to provide that level of the standard of care that's expected of me. And the next thing they have to prove is I should be able to know or foresee that that breach of duty could cause harm to my patient. I should be able to, any reasonable nurse would realize if I fail to assess my patient, that's failing to do my duty, and that patient harm could result, especially if now they have skin breakdown, or especially if you know, they've had surgery and now they're bleeding and I'm not paying attention to their vital signs. So I should foresee not doing my vital signs or not doing my assessment or not reassessing my patient in a timely way could hurt my patient. I should know that if I'm going to give this medication and I don't look for specific side effects of this medication from my patient, that my patient could be harmed. And then if I don't tell my patient what to expect, then they develop an adverse outcome or effect, then they could charge me with breach of duty, and that I should foresee that that would cause that harm. And then they also have to prove that my breach of duty directly led to the injury or harm done to the patient. It doesn't mean that that my breach of duty is the only thing that caused the harm. But if my breach of duty is a substantial is a substantial part of what directly caused harm to that patient, then I have injured that patient, I have led to the harm to that patient, and damages, monetary damages would be awarded. And this is typically by a jury duty that this would happen, so that they're going to look through all of these elements and see did the plaintiff's attorney indeed prove that that they have met the proof to show that I have not, I had a duty, I breached my duty, I should have foreseen that that would cause harm, and it indeed did lead to harm to my patient, and therefore the jury will find me guilty and award them damages. Well, actually, they find me liable and they award me the plaintiff damages. So let's put it into place on a fall risk, okay? All right. So, do we have a duty to respond to all patient call-outs on our unit?
Yes.
Yes. Do we have it's not my list of 8 patients or 6 patients. I still have a duty. If nobody moves to go check out that alarm, I have a duty, okay? So I walked by and there's a patient who's been calling out. Well, he's calling out, help me, help me. And, that patient is assigned to another nurse. So I just continue ignoring that call for help. I don't see anybody else go in there, or I don't really bother to pay attention if anybody goes in there, but I ignore their call for help. What if that patient gets out of bed and breaks his hip? Should I have foreseen that would happen if I ignore his call for help? Yes. So patient gets out, falls, breaks his hip. Now, they could say, well, the patient was told not to get out of bed. Yeah, but still, by me not going into the room, I am at least partially responsible, even if that patient has been told not to get out of bed without help. I can be partially responsible if I didn't answer the calls for help. If I didn't answer that call light that went off in the bathroom, I would still be at least partially responsible. And then damages can be, yes, I'd be found liable in this situation. And that is what we want to avoid, not just so that we don't have to go to court, but because it means that a patient suffered by being in my institution or my facility or on my floor or part of my program. And that's what we're there to do. Remember, the Texas Board of Nursing's job is to promote and protect the welfare of the people of Texas. My duty is to promote and protect the welfare of the people that are within my circle of care that day. Okay, so to the best of my ability, I need to be sure that I try to be cognizant and on top of what is my duty here, what's my responsibility. Now, categories of negligence, and when I'm not having to do my lectures in Blackboard, I would have the screen blank and ask you to tell me what are some of the things that cause you to have malpractice. So instead, let's see, a couple of these may be a little harder to figure out, but how could a failure to communicate cause me to be involved in malpractice litigation?
Didn't give proper report.
Okay, so yeah, if I didn't get report, and I've actually had this happen where the nurse is coming on, I'm on the night shift, the nurse is coming on, and I know she's on the unit, she stuck her head in the door, I'm ready to give report and can't find her, and she has gone to get her breakfast, okay? And so I'm not there to give her report, and she's not there to give me report, and I'm like, okay, so the institutions want you to get in and out in a timely way. They don't want you there 2 and 3 hours after your change of shift because they have to pay you overtime. So I know I need to get out of there on time, and that nurse isn't there. And so then the question comes, so what do I do? And in some facilities, they record reports so that you can go ahead and, once the person is on the unit, you can leave. Well, failure for her to come and communicate and get that report, that could make her liable, especially if it's one of those where I've given my report, it's recorded for her, she can listen to it anytime you want. But she's on the floor. I am now relieved because they say, okay, it's change of shift, you finished your documentation, you have an hour to get done and leave. And I leave, and she's still not gone in there and got report on that patient, and then that patient deteriorates. She has failed to properly communicate about this patient. Another way that the communication could happen is my patient's potassium level is 5.5, and I don't call the doctor. And so the doctor doesn't know to write for orders to help get that potassium level down, and that patient's heart stops. Failure to communicate. Failure to document. Yes, your question?
For the failure to communicate aspect, could that also be as like we didn't properly read back an order to the doctor? Would that be like a possibility or no? Because it's
It would
that's on the
certainly
doctor.
leave you, it would certainly leave you liable, because at that point it becomes to, the doctor said, you said. And you don't want to be in that case. And so if you're reading back an order, that gives them the chance to clarify. And if they don't, and that again, did I follow what is considered the standard of care? That first one, standard of care, I get a telephone order or verbal order. I repeat it back to them and make sure that I'm clear on that. That is becoming less of an issue now because of electronic health records. There's almost no reason that a provider can't walk over to a computer and type that order in. So we really discourage them giving us verbal orders. We really want them to go, because they can walk right to a monitor and type in that order. They can even do it from their office. So that they're more and more trying to discourage it. But if I do get a telephone order, like I've got to call a doctor in the middle of the night, obviously they're not up and going to be able to type it in, then I want to be very careful that after I've written down what they've said, I read it back to them exactly as they told me, and I get them to say, yes, that's correct, or they make changes, and I repeat that back to them. And then when I sign that, when I write that order, it was Dr. So-and-so telephone order to Nurse Nancy Bryant Huff, okay? Date and time, everything is on there. That's standard of care, all right? By the way, if the pieces of equipment that you don't know in your room, why do we say you go and learn them? Because you're responsible for any equipment that's in your patient's room that will be used on your patient. Failure to document. How would me not documenting something lead to malpractice? How would that cause a failure to do duty and see that it could cause harm and the patient could be harmed if I didn't document something? How could that be a problem? Anybody get a guess, an idea? Itzel, have an idea?
It's like if you don't document that you gave so and so their warfarin, and then an hour later another nurse comes and gives them another warfarin, and they could bleed out.
Very good. It's a very good example, especially with medications. Especially the PRN medications, y'all have seen that the scheduled drugs, they're going to show up and they're going to light up and everything sees that. But the PRNs, remember, if I'm giving something for pain, I'm giving something that's a one-time thing or a PRN, and I don't document it. And so that's why one of the first questions you should get in your report is, when were they last medicated? Because I want to know, if he had morphine at 6 a.m. and I come on at 7 and the patient's complaining of pain when I go and see him at 7:30, and I give him a dose of morphine because the last nurse didn't document the morphine, then failure to document could land us both in hot water, okay? Me for not asking that question, the communication, not asking that question when I got change of shift, when was he last medicated, and for that nurse to failure to document that dose of especially if it's like a narcotic that can depress the respiratory drive, really important. You'll notice that because the insulin often happens at change of shift, it's really be careful there, okay? Because who did the blood glucose? Probably the technician on nights and got that about 6 or 6:30. Did the night nurse get that information and address it? Did they chart that they gave the insulin? Did they communicate to you the insulin was given? They didn't and it's not charted, do I give it? What am I going to do now? So failure to document can put more than you in trouble. All right. Failure to assess and to monitor. So I need to assess my patient, and the documentation also on my assessments is crucial. So you could be wrong, you could be charged for both failure to assess and failure to document. I don't assess my patient when I come on. The patient was asleep, and the night nurse told me, oh, he didn't have a good night. He was real restless, wants to sleep. Okay, so I don't go in there. And I go in there maybe an hour later, hour and a half later, and he won't wake up. I don't know, did this just happen or did this happen an hour and a half ago? failure to assess. So I go, at least go in the room, I make sure they're breathing, I make sure that they can at least open their eyes when I knock on the door. I'm gonna at least know that they're able to be roused, okay? But I want to assess them, because if they deteriorate from that, I've got a baseline, I've got something to base it on. And then I should monitor if I'm concerned the person's heart rate is a little high, their SpO2s are a little low, their respiratory rates are trending up, then I need to be monitoring that patient, and I should be documenting those things, those changes, and that I'm monitoring them, what I've done about them, so that I protect, both take best care for my patient, but it's also protecting me from malpractice, because I assessed, I monitored, I notified, I communicated with the provider these changes. If I think it's an urgent situation developing and I don't get the response I need from the provider, I'm going to go to my charge nurse or to my director of nursing, whoever is that next person up, and say, I've contacted him twice, he's not responding, I can't get her to come in. Whatever the situation is, and I'm making you aware of it. I think that we need to ask in some hospitals, the ER doctor would come up and see the patient for you. And the more the hospitals now, there's a hospitalist who would be available. But I need to have, I need to be assessing, monitoring, documenting those situations. Failure to act as a client advocate. I can't tell you, with my mother over the last year, how many times I got frustrated with the nurses, and it's the nurses I was upset with, not the doctor, because they would see my mom in an outpatient setting, where she broke her leg, and they sent her out with a heavy boot on her leg. She at this time was 88 years old, cannot pick up that leg on her own. To even get in the car, she has to lift her leg up and put it in. They don't give her crutches because they don't think that she should be on crutches at her age. They don't give her a walker. And then they don't even ask her how many steps is it for her to get into her house. She has 5 steps to get into her front door. And my aunt, who's 10 years younger than my mother, so my 78-year-old aunt is holding my mother's foot and leg in the boot, and my mother sits on her bottom, and she scoots up the stairs backwards on her bottom, using her arms to push herself up the stairs until they can get her to the top of those 5 steps. And then my aunt and my mother have to get her standing back up. There should have been an advocate saying, hey, Miss Huff has, Miss Bryant has, she's got 5 steps up to her house. Should we send her home with a walker? And, it's like, hello. But your chances as a client advocate, what would have happened if they'd tried to get her up or tried to get her out of the car and they fell with her because they had no way of getting her out of the car. They had not been instructed how to move, which, the weak side first or strong side first, and, all that. What would have happened? Who would have been liable? So be your client's advocate on issues that especially are going to leave them without help, without care when they most need it. All right. There's a really nice chart in Kosher as well, and it takes these things that we were just talking about and turns them around in strategies of ways to protect your patient. When you view the slide outside of this Blackboard lecture, some of them are written at the bottom, but basically, is communicate with the patients and family. It is document, document, document. It is, making sure that you're following your facility's policies and procedures. Make sure that you stay inside your scope of practice. So you may want to take a look at it. It's just kind of it's a way of the one we just read was all kind of negative: failure, failure, failure. Well, how to prevent those things from happening? This box is really good. So look at that box in Kosher. All right, that was legal. Again, remember what's legal? Okay. Hello, everybody. Legal is that thing that is required by law. There's a law for it, and then a crime is failing to keep that law. So legal has to do with laws and following the laws, complying with the laws, or not complying with the laws. Now we're going to go into more of the ethical issues, and those are remember the muddy areas? So ethicals, those are the things you go, that's just not right. Or that, you know, I think nowadays you hear a lot more people probably say it's unfair, but ethicals more than just not being fair. It's sometimes choosing between two hard things. How do you make that decision? And that's what we want to talk about a little bit here. Oh, by the way, did you know that there's National Student Nurses Code of Conduct? I've just put a few of them up here. But one of the things in your code of conduct is that you show excellence in nursing by lifelong learning and professional development. So that means that you would do more than just go to school. The understanding going to school isn't the end of your training and education. It's just the beginning. It just marks a milestone. But performing any procedure that you've not been adequately trained. So for you, that's not doing any procedures you've not been checked off on. That's why that's in our student handbook as unsafe practice. And maintaining your optimal personal level of health, because if you're not taking care of you and you're at the bedside and you're dehydrated, you haven't eaten, your blood sugar falls, then not only yourself could be at danger, but so could the patient. So that these are things that are in the ought to be's. There's nothing in the Nurse Practice Act that says you have to eat breakfast, but there's that should you be at your best physically in taking care of a patient? Yes, and that's where the should and should nots come in. All right, want to review the next part. It's one of our standards. It's one of the objectives for the units. It's a little confusing. There we go. This is talking about levels of health care prevention. Okay, think promotion prevention here. All right. Well, what are the levels that? Well, there's primary health care prevention, and that's I'm wanting to keep people well. So what would that be? Prenatal classes, nutritional classes, immunizations, helping people stop smoking, those kind of things. Those are promoting health, preventing illness, okay? And that's a primary level of health prevention. A secondary level of health prevention is where I'm making sure that the illnesses people have are under control, all right? And so that would be like a doctor's office. We put somebody in the hospital because we want to manage their acute illness and keep them from becoming sicker, okay, and get them well. And then tertiary prevention is somebody's already has a health problem. It has caused some kind of loss or damage, but now we want to get them to their best level of functioning. If possible, restore them to their previous level of functioning. It's also known as getting them to their optimal level of function. And we see that with rehabilitation units. We see that with palliative care, where we're trying to prevent any further deterioration in their situation. And hospice comes under this in the sense that we want to maintain as much level of function for as long as possible. And it's one of the objectives, is the reason I'm covering it. It's a little confusing because what you're going to hear mostly used is what's on the slide. Say again? Say again? Was there a question? Yes. Yes. It's
So in primary, they're trying to not get the disease. Is that
Say
what
again?
you do in primary? It's where they
Primary. Yes, either
correct?
promoting health,
So-
making sure to keep you healthy. So keep you healthy. How do we keep people healthy? Immunizations, weight loss programs, thinking more in terms of outpatient or community. prenatal clinics. These are things where we're prenatal clinics. So you basically, pregnancy is not an illness or disease. It is just an added layer onto the normal health that a woman would have. Okay, so the prenatal clinics, nutrition, going to places like nutritional consults, weight loss programs. I'm trying to think of any of the others off the top of my head. Not really, but it's primary in that we're wanting to promote health and prevent developing an illness.
Is that where they do the screening?
It could be screenings as well. And it can't, a facility can do more than one level of healthcare prevention. For instance, one of the newer physical therapies companies that is in town now, they have a program where you don't even need a doctor's order, but you can come in and they will teach you about fall risk and how to prevent it. And that's health promotion. These are not people who are scheduled for rehab and they're there to do that. They open it up to the community. I think the advertisements, like I think I saw one on Facebook, but they're advertising, sign up, call us, free classes on fall risk prevention. And and I was curious to see what they did, so I went to it, and yeah, it was people from all walks of life were there, but they were either had a family member they were concerned about, a loved one they're concerned about, or they're beginning to age, and so they wanted to be proactive. Again, that's another word I probably would use here is proactive. You're being proactive about your health, proactive about preventing illness. You've got a family history of coronary artery disease. You don't have any problems right now, but I want to be proactive and I want to get information. I want to be have wellness. These are like wellness programs, okay? And I want to join this wellness program, say at the local gym, because I want to reduce my risk for my family's history of coronary artery disease. Okay, so keeping healthy, preventing onset of illness or developing illness. Okay, did that answer your question itself?
Yes, it's because I've always gotten that question wrong, where is screening part of primary or secondary, and I always get it wrong.
And that's why they make a big deal about this, but I find it real confusing myself, and I'll show you the next slide why. Because when most people are talking about, they're talking about the medical model in terms of facilities, and that's different from this. This is talking about healthcare prevention. So this is all the things that nurses are good at in terms of the teaching, risk screening, and those areas of nursing that we really have a lot to offer. And then the secondary is when they begin to encounter medical care, but at the same time, it's still more the maintenance. Like the American Diabetic Association, they're talking to people who already have an illness, but now they're dealing with an acute illness or injury. Wound care clinics would be like a secondary one where they've got a wound, but we want, they're there, they're getting treatments, but but it's to get them, it's to deal with this issue, but what they have is something that we're going to fix and get them back up and going. Versus the tertiaries where some loss or damage has happened, they need some specialized care to get them back to their level of functioning, and that's rehab, palliative care, and hospice show up there. Yes, Raymond.
So I always struggle with primary, secondary, and tertiary. I guess an example in my mind that comes, if we're talking about diabetes, and treatment of diabetes would go under secondary, and let's say they have like diabetic neuropathy or something like that, then that is tertiary?
No. If they've already, we're looking in terms of the preventative care. Okay, so what are we trying to prevent? The foot care, the wound care for that diabetic. Okay, that's what we're wanting to do. That then, now if I'm teaching him, I'm going and getting instruction about what I need to do about how to do foot care. That's my primary, okay? But if I've got this wound now and it's non-healing and I've got to go to a freestanding wound care center to have that dealt with, and I'm having that dressed 2 times a week or something like that, I'm now down to secondary prevention. I'm trying to prevent that wound from getting worse, prevent it from getting infected, and also we're trying to get it to heal. Tertiary would be then they've had a damage, they ended up, the circulation, the wound didn't heal, they had a graft, along the way they maybe lost a toe or something because of circulatory problems, and now then they're going to rehab to get help with their balance to walk. Then that's tertiary. I'm trying to get them back up to where they were before, or at least as high a level of function as possible. And again, the goal is trying to keep them as healthy as we can, trying to prevent them from getting sicker. And this is all about preventative, and a lot of it has to do with the teachings, the maintenance, the health promotion. And so it's really working on primary health promotion and prevention. The secondary, you're starting to look at maintenance. And then the tertiary is basically restoration. We're trying to get them back up to a high level of function compared to where they are now. Because they've lost ground, we're trying to restore that. So I think that's probably the good words. Primary, think of promotion and prevention. The secondary is trying to maintain their illness or their condition. And then tertiary is they've had damage or loss, and we're trying to get them back up to their optimal level of function. There's only, I don't know, I don't think the blueprint is not up yet, but look at how many objectives I have compared to the other stuff, and there's only going to be, there can be less than maybe a handful, maybe a little bit more than that of questions on this content. So think big picture, think of, I wouldn't get down into the real nitty gritty on it. I know there are questions in Prep U on this, and that's why I'm presenting it. But it's more just thinking in terms of our role really as nurses. We have a lot more to deal with these things, the prevention levels, than we really, when you think about it, once they're admitted to the hospital and we're dealing with an acutely ill patient, it's all collaborative at that point. But you'll find nurses involved in all of these roles of prevention, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And that's really what we do. Okay. So try to get a good understanding of it, but it's just a concept to help you understand where our role is, our function, where we specialize in, basically, as opposed to in the acute care setting, where much more of that is collaboration, where we have to work along with a provider. Now, where you may get confused in this one, because the medical model, and these are talking about the types of facilities, all right? That's different. Primary care, that's where you first enter the healthcare medical system. Secondary care, that's when you need specialists, you need consultations. And then tertiary is the specialty hospitals, the research hospitals, the university medical centers. Those are the tertiary medical care. So these are medical care, primary medical care, secondary medical care, tertiary medical care. And it's really talking more at what point you are in the system in terms of acute care, getting your problems, getting healthcare access, okay, for problems. The other one is prevention. And that's about as good as I can explain it for you, okay? So again, this would have been a screen where I would have it blank, and you tell me where all the nurses have gone. Where do you see all the nurses? Everywhere. You see nurses everywhere. I love nursing because of this one thing. We can do so much in so many job settings, okay? Visiting nurses, public health is really important. We've seen how important that has come to be with the COVID and contact tracing. You know that there are nurses and advanced practice nurses in private practice and in doctors' offices. We are more probably familiar with school nurses than occupational health nurses, but many corporations, especially like I know like in the oil industry and the petroleum industry, hire occupational health nurses because they need to have somebody on site who's kind of looking out for the occupational hazards and helping promote, again, kind of that occupational health nurse is more kind of promoting health and trying to prevent illness. Occupational health nurse would encourage them to use a wellness program. If the insurance, get an insurance plan that has a wellness program for their people, for their employees. We're really familiar with acute care facilities because of RN's work there. You're still seeing some vocational nurses in acute care hospitals, but more and more facilities are going to all RN staffing. But also in those acute care hospitals are advanced practice nurses. How many of you are in well, don't raise your hands, but how many, think about it, have you seen that the hospital you go to uses a hospitalist group? If it's the Hospitals of Providence, all of those they use a hospitalist group. So instead of your doctor, when you get admitted in the ER, having to come in and take care of you, typically what happens is a hospitalist group will take care of your admission, manage you acutely, confer with your primary care provider, and then send you back to her when they're done, when you're discharged. And so you will see that. Well, guess what? Guess who's making the rounds for the hospitalist? Family nurse practitioners. Okay, they're the ones often that you're encountering who come around making rounds on the patient. The doctors, depending on, like a surgeon's going to come, obviously, and if they're talking about a procedure, the surgeon talks to them about the procedure. But you're going to see these advanced practice nurses in the acute care settings, especially. Clinical nurse specialists, you probably not as familiar with them. They're more likely to be doing the research, like what's going on, how many of our people after our open heart surgeries get readmitted, why that's happening, how can we change our policies and make it so that that no longer occurs. So the clinical nurse specialists they're looking at more the background, what's going on, why are we having this happen, why are we having so many diabetics coming in with wound care, what can we do to help that, how can we change how we discharge them so that no longer happens. So they're looking at the outcomes, and they're finding the research that says what's best practice, and they're helping the facilities change their policies to meet best practice. And that's a real important role they do. But they're often, you won't even know when you've bumped into one, because they are often behind the scenes. Case managers. I hope you got to know your case management people while you're at the hospital. They're the ones who are helping figure out what's going to happen to this patient once they're discharged from this facility. They all have to go somewhere, and case management is responsible to help make that transition to the next level of care. So case managers, many of them are nurses, some are social workers, social services, sometimes this also provides this role, but it's often nurses, because they're having to talk to the insurance companies and explain the patient's care, why the insurance needs to pay for this, and how it meets the insurance requirements. And so they're essential for helping make that transition possible. Long-term care, we're seeing more and more that the vocational nurses there, RN is usually going to be sometimes the charge nurse, often the director of the nursing is going to be the RN managing long-term care, assisted care. And that's becoming huge because of our aging population. So if you like the geriatric population, that's something to think about as an area of working to keep them healthy within an assisted living, so that they don't lose their independence and have to go into long-term care. We know home health, daycare for those who have some chronic medical needs, but also need the social contact. Benvivier is an example of kind of a daycare healthcare setting. And then nurses get into law as well because they want expert nurses. Whenever there's a malpractice suit, expert nurses. One of the nurses, she's an instructor, she works sometimes part-time for us for clinical. She's also on an instructor at New Mexico State, and she is an expert nurse. She goes to court case. She will review a chart. She'll work for the either malpractice attorney or a plaintiff's attorney to look at the care that was given and determine if the standard of care was met or not met. And that's what consultants in jurisprudence would do. They would come in and take over those kind of roles. Specialized training, I know they offer it at UTEP. It's $3,000 or $4,000 to take the course, but you can actually become a certified nurse consultant and provide that for big business, different types of corporations who may need that kind of the eye of a nurse kind of on top of something, some program that they're running. So wherever all the nurses go, we go everywhere. Now, a couple of things I want you to hear. Right now, I know you don't think of yourself as the coordinator of care, but that's who you're becoming for your patient, the coordinator of care. That is my responsibility. That's your responsibility when I have a patient. I'm making sure that everybody that's supposed to be coming in contact with that patient does so. And if they don't, I'm following up on where are they and when will they. So I'm coordinator of care. I should be paying attention that if the patient has OT and PT, but they're not in a rehab unit, that OT and PT come. In some facilities, respiratory therapy does the respiratory treatments, the albuterol nebulizers, and I need to look and make sure they're coming, because guess what? I'm still ultimately accountable for the care delivered to my patient. My example is I had a patient that I was in with an agency nursing for a short time, and I was at a facility that I was new to. And when I got report, I was told respiratory therapy does all of the breathing treatments, nebulizers, inhalers, all that. And said, okay. And so this is nurse going off after a 12-hour shift. And I look at my patient's chart, and sure enough, she has nebulizers ordered every 4 hours. And I'm thinking, and I failed to ask, well, when was the last one? But the nurse said, said that the respiratory was taking care of it. So I thought, okay. And it was a busy, and I'm learning my way. So I'm paying attention, and I've done my assessment. Patient's lungs had full of bronchi. She's not really wanting to respond to me well, but I had been told she was like this, and she was obtunded, that she wasn't really responsive. Her son shows up, and he's telling me about his mom, and he's describing a woman who has been independent prior to this illness. And so I'm now beginning to get concerned. And so I'm looking, and I can't see where respiratory's been there. And so I called them, and you know what they told me? That because of the way the order was written, the nurses were responsible for this nebulizer treatment. So what does that mean? That means not only has the patient not had a nebulizer treatment the whole time I've been there, which is now coming on 3 hours, that patient also didn't get on for the last 12 hours. No wonder she sounds like she does, and no wonder she's not getting better. So I'm coordinator of care. I need to collaborate with the different professions and find out when they're scheduled to come. And if they don't come, I'm to follow up on that. Say, hey, where is physical therapy? The doctor's orders for the first time to get her out of bed that the physical therapy needs to do it. And so we can't get her up until you do the first one and evaluate what we need to do to safely transfer this patient in and out of bed. So collaboration is one of my jobs as coordinator of care. Discharge planning, another one of my jobs. Some of you have been able to see the discharge. We've got to move this patient safely from one level of care to another, maybe to go home, maybe to go to hospice, maybe to go to long-term care facility, but I'm involved in the discharge planning, and I should start thinking about that as soon as my patient is admitted and we know what's going on, because it takes a while to get insurance to agree. It takes a while to find an opening in a facility. if I have to send them to a facility, it takes a while to get information to find out if they can safely go home. Can they navigate the stairs? Can they, is their bedroom on the second floor? When they're on a walker? I need to be getting this, starting to help make sure this information is looked at and we're making a plan. Was it Alyssa? Hand went up and went down. Did you have a question? Okay. If you do want to put it in the chat, that's okay too. So discharge planning, what's involved? Well, one, this is what we should be teaching our patient. This is what your diagnosis is, and it means this, okay? These are the things that we've done for you. These are the medications you're going home on. This is when you're supposed to follow up. If they had operation, they should have an appointment for their physician, for their surgeon, and any of the other consults, or if they have a referral for physical therapy, they want you to start physical therapy in 2 weeks. Okay, our physical therapy is home health is going to work with you and schedule physical therapy to come do physical therapy in your home. So these things need to be happening. I need to be giving the patient this information. And then the most important thing in my mind is that I give them emergency warnings. We always leave the door open. We always let them know when they need to come back to the emergency room, when they need to contact their provider. We need to leave the door open. They go home. They don't know now. They're dealing with mom, and they don't know if this situation is something that they would need to get help for. So we tell them, if these things happen, you need to come back, or you need to see your provider. And it could be something simple as they came into the emergency room, they got staples or sutures in an incision. Maybe they had a pretty nasty cut and they've got stitches. I need to tell them, okay, well, they said that you didn't tear any tendons or ligaments, but you do have this cut. We've sewn it up, we cleaned it out, and now then we're giving you this medication to take. You need to take this antibiotic because they're concerned that you get a wound infection in your hand. You're going to take this medication this many times a day, and you're going to take it until all the pills are gone. And then you're going to follow up. This is your hand, and the doctor wants you to come back in 10 days to get the stitches taken out, okay? How do I know when to come sooner? If it starts turning red, swollen, very painful, especially after it hadn't been. It starts having pus from it. You start running fever. Then you need to come in right away and have us look at that. That's how I do the discharge planning. That's for something simple. But I could do the same thing for somebody who had open heart surgery. Diagnosis, this is what you had. This is what we're doing for you. This is the medications you're going home on. This is who you need to see after you leave us, and when you need to see them, and when you need to come back in right away. And that's what we should be giving everybody that we discharge. Some of you have had experience with the discharges. Did you see much of that? Anybody seen a discharge for a patient that cares to talk about it? Okay.
I got to do one discharge with a nurse.
And did you see any of this happen, or much of this go on, be given to the patient?
Yeah, mostly she just printed out the paperwork. She kind of talked through, and then she listed on the discharge paperwork when the last medications were given, at what time, when the next medication is due, and then about basically to care for the wound. And then she did another assessment before the patient left.
Okay. And there may have been information on the sheet. I know we tend to hand it to people, and I know nurses are busy, super busy. I would just make sure that I would say these things, and it's also on the sheet of paper, and most of them are going to have to go back and look at the sheet of paper anyway, especially about all this stuff about the medications. They're not going to remember all the information. I tell them on six different types of medicine, but you're going to continue your beta blocker. Remember the medication reconciliation? You're going to continue your beta blocker. He is leaving it at the same dose. He has increased your furosemide to the same size tablets, but you need to take them twice a day. And there's a prescription for this. Don't take it and the other medicine. Just take this one. Okay, those kind of information, I really should kind of make sure I emphasize those parts of it. The things that are going to make, that are going to be a problem or will be confusing or make them sick if I don't tell them. And always, always tell them, if these things start to happen, you need to come back in promptly, because they need to know that. How many of you have been there? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. You're trying to decide, do I wait it out or do I go be seen? Imagine if you had just been sent home from the hospital and now you're thinking, oh, I'm just panicky, I'm just scared, or I'm just whatever, and they don't know if they should go back in and get help. So we need to help them know that. Just a really important part of our job that really not many other people do. And SBARs, you know, everybody's great at doing them now, right? We all know how to do an SBAR. Remember, SBAR, we're trying to talk, it depends on who I'm talking to. If I'm doing an SBAR to the change of shift, I'm going to give a lot more detail than if I'm calling a provider needing a new order, okay? Or calling a provider with a patient who's had a deterioration in status. That looks very and sounds very different than the SBAR that I give at change of shift, but it's still organizing myself the same way. And it's important because we've all been trained in SBAR, medical and nursing, respiratory, physical therapy. They've all been trained in it. And I begin to collect my information that way too. And I kind of think through it the same way so that it's easier to communicate and transmit information back and forth if we're using the same pattern. And so that's why the SBAR is really kind of an important thing to master here, okay? You're going to learn some newer ones as well in 3rd semester. They go on into I Pass the Baton and some of the other ones that are out there that are a lot more in-depth. But I really should be able to do this, at least be able to do this to cogently explain if we had it Tuesday. They've been waiting on the urologist to show up, and finally he does, and the nurse has just finally gone on break. So student gives the SBAR to the provider, or at least starts to, and this provider keeps interrupting by asking a bunch of other questions. But yeah, you should be able at that point, if the provider walked in and said, how's Mr. Brown doing today? You ought to be able to give an SBAR, be able to pull out from that what's crucial to tell the provider and what isn't information that's needed for the situation. So you've been trained how to do it. You're going to start having nurses who will have you call the provider and do the SBAR. So you really want to be able to do that, okay? It's a good way to practice organizing your thoughts. And it is also, the more practice you have, the more comfortable you'll be, and the better you're going to be able, with your SBAR, you're painting a picture for the person you're talking to. And if I'm having to call a provider, I got to paint the picture for what's going on, or the provider can't have an accurate understanding of the situation and may not give me what I really need for the patient. So I got to be good at painting pictures, mental pictures, by how I do my SBARs. All right, we're going to take a short break because it's, we've been going a while, a little over about an hour and 20 minutes now. We're going to take a break. I'm going to stop the recording on this one. Any other questions for clarity before we do take our break? We'll come back, we'll do safety, and that'll pretty much cover the leadership content. Now, I have gone through the discussion board. I'll be posting grades in the next 24 hours on that. And a couple places I did clarify some things because while the student may have done a good job, it was specific information that I also wanted to make sure was up on the board. It's a great study tool. I've looked at your answers. Y'all done a good job on them. And there's a few places where there were no posts, and I'm going to go back. Actually, I'm going to go back on one of them because one is a student who dropped since I made the assignment. So that one I will cover. But the rest of it is up. What's up is what you've got. You may want to check your Blackboard emails. A few of you may have emailed just asking you, could you help me by adding a few things to yours as well? Okay, so we're going to go ahead now. It is 3:20. Is 10 minutes enough, or do you all need longer? You need 10 or 15?
15.
15. We're going to go for 15. All right. So we will be back here at, be like at 3:35-ish. Okay. 3:35. We'll be back here. Thank you.